We need to continue hammering home. Okay. We need to continue hammering home that Project 2025 is a major threat to the American people. It is the plan to gut the administrative state and install yes men who will facilitate Donald Trump's insane, orders to the letter, even if they are illegal. Like that is essentially what is going on here. Again, there are many reports and stories and coverage of insane decisions Donald Trump wanted to make but was restricted from doing while in office, including using the military on the American people, including trying to start a nuclear war with North Korea, as well as Iran. Like, he cannot be allowed to be in power, because if he is in power, this is the fascist agenda. And this is the vehicle with which that agenda will come to fruition. So it's important for us to talk about it. And this video is about an hour long, and it's called Federal Regulatory Process, which I know is not the most exciting name that you could give something like this. But we must keep a stiff upper lip and sally forth into the boring unknown. And I don't know if it's going to be boring, but with a name like that and the fact that it's hosted by someone who I'm sure is basically racist Santa Claus, we're in for a doozy. So buckle in, folks. Here we go. Thank you to ProPublica for publishing these unedited. It's
My name is David
really
Burton.
good that we have
I'm
it.
a senior fellow in economic policy at the Heritage Foundation. This course is called How to Promulgate a Rule.
Oh, buddy, you think you're teaching a course? Oh, babe. No, this isn't a course.
In the eyes of many in the world, this every 4-year ceremony we accept as normal
4-year ceremony
is nothing less than a miracle.
In America, we understand that a nation
We are
is
only
living
a nation
as long as
we are living. It is only true that we are a nation as long as our heart beats. Like, what? That doesn't mean anything. It doesn't, it doesn't mean anything. He's got a list. He's checking it twice. He's going to find out who's naughty and white. Yeah, that is really what racist Santa Claus is in a nutshell, isn't it? God, I mean, but this guy's list is gonna be like, well, in poor taste, to say the least. Wait a minute, that's a very different title than Federal Regulatory Process. How to Promulgate a Rule. They actually got a title card on this one? All right. Time to strap in and strap on.
The course is meant for any political appointee in an executive branch policymaking role. The course is a guide to learning the skills necessary to actually win executive branch conservative policy victories.
Oh, okay. So he's teaching you how to actually get the fascism done. All right, cool.
Victories in the real world, given the political and legal environment in which we are actually in.
Sorry, what's his
Allow
name?
me some introductory remarks before I get into the substance of the course. Many people, I suspect, will find the material in this course to be boring, tedious.
Oh no. Even he's calling it that. Oh no.
Even. But let me be frank. If you don't learn the material in this course, you'll make mistakes that are likely to cripple your substantive policy agenda. Thus, if you want to be effective, you must learn this material. To meaningfully advance the conservative agenda, you must learn that to actually win.
David R. Burton, okay.
Is probably going to come via rulemakings in the executive branch. This represents a genuine opportunity to transform government in a positive way. But to accomplish this, political appointees need to learn this material. A rule must be done according to the rules of rulemaking if it is to survive judicial review. Most of this course is about the rules governing rulemaking. Now, there are federal employees that view their job in the traditional manner, as helping political appointees implement the agenda of the elected president. These employees are now a distinct minority. Much of the bureaucracy is committed to the progressive agenda. They will resist, slow walk, and stone.
So I'm just kind of looking up what the Heritage Foundation says about him. And, well, it's pretty interesting here. He was general counsel at the National Small Business Association for 2 years before joining Heritage's Rowe Institute for Economic Policy Studies in 2013. He was previously chief financial officer and general counsel of the startup Alliance for Retirement Prosperity, a conservative alternative to the AARP. And, like, dog. What? You're not going to beat AARP. Are you kidding me? I'm pretty sure, and last I checked, granted, was like 10 years ago, but AARP is like one of the most distributed like magazines in the United States. Like, it's crazy. Like, you're not going to make inroads there. Are you kidding me? For 15 years, Burton was a partner in the Argus Group, a Virginia-based law, public policy, and government relations firm. Why does that sound familiar? What is Argus Group? Virginia. Maybe I need to specify Virginia. Literally, I have no idea what this is. Okay. A government relations firm. All of this, by the way, just sounds like he got hired by, like, a string of organizations that were backed by billionaires as, like, fronts for their policy agenda, you know? Like, that's been his entire life, being a lapdog for these people. His career in financial and tax matters also includes the posts of Vice President for Finance and General Counsel of New England Machinery, a multinational manufacturer of packaging equipment and testing instruments, and member of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce's Tax Policy Center. Okay, cool.
Those trying to implement a conservative agenda. In managing the bureaucracy, you will need to try to identify those who will actually do their jobs and avail yourselves of their skills. But you will need to constantly push and control. And you'll also need to have the knowledge and skills to circumvent.
Why is he holding his arm like that? My working theory is that right before filming, he accidentally chopped it off, but he's too embarrassed to tell anyone about it. So he's just holding the limp nub of his hand and trying to pretend like his hand is still there and functional. That's my working theory.
And those in the bureaucracy, a majority, who will actively seek to impede the implementation of a conservative agenda. You must have the knowledge to draft proposed rules and final rules and the corresponding releases with a minimum of bureaucratic assistance.
You know, I know that this is boring, and you led with calling it boring, but that is no excuse to be this completely risless.
The federal government is not the private sector. Federal employees have their own agenda and are extremely difficult to fire. In most agencies, workers are more likely to die at their desks than they are to be successfully terminated. Moreover, terminating...
Why would you want it to be more likely that they get fired? They're career bureaucrats. Their job is to, like, move the machinery of government. Like, that's their job is to, like, be in that position, slowly moving up marginal rankings until the day they die. That is their job, yeah.
An employee, even for rank insubordination or incompetence, is a lengthy, time-consuming process under current rules. It usually is simply not worth the time involved. Your time is better spent furthering the conservative policy agenda. As an aside, you should read Chapter 3 in Project 2025's Mandate for Leadership, The Conservative Promise. The chapter is entitled Central Personnel Agencies Managing the Bureaucracy. Now, you cannot expect the bureaucracy to simply...
So basically what he's trying to say here is that one of the big problems with government right now is that if your boss tells you to do something and you say no, that like they can't immediately fire you on the spot and instead have to like engage in a process of firing you and justifying the firing, which like I actually think that's kind of a good thing. Like, if it's not worth the trouble to fire someone, then clearly the infraction wasn't serious enough, right?
do as you ask. In most cases, it will not, or if it does, it will do so at an incredibly glacial pace. It is of incredible importance that
And this guy knows something about glacial paces. Just listen to how fast he talks.
incoming conservative administration addresses this problem for senior federal workers with a role in policymaking. It must adopt something...
I don't know why he said die at your desk instead of retire. Like, what the fuck? Well, because in his ideal world, he would simply shackle bureaucrats to their desks.
Akin to the Trump administration's Schedule F almost immediately, or otherwise make senior federal officials employees at will. Schedule F was adopted in the waning days of the Trump administration, never implemented, and revoked on the third day of the Biden administration. Senior federal officials should not be able to ignore the American people and elected officials, and if they overtly or clandestinely are insubordinate, they should be forced to find employment in the wilds of the private sector. This will be highly controversial and will be fiercely resisted by progressive politicians, government unions, and the bureaucracy.
Yeah, you should be able to. Basically, what he's saying is that, you know, if a government employee looks at you funny, you should be able to kick them out on the street, like Ebenezer Scrooge to Bob Cratchit. I guess he didn't kick Bob Cratchit out onto the street. Like Ebenezer Scrooge to all of Bob Cratchit's colleagues. There we go.
But until that happens, and the bureaucracy is forced to become more responsive to appointees of the elected president, reality requires that you have the skills and the knowledge to proceed despite the bureaucracy and not with its assistance. Our job as conservatives is harder than that of progressives, because the federal bureaucracy is generally...
Ebenezer Scrooge, obviously the main character of the soon-to-be-produced... A Cuckmas Carol. Anyway.
Become an arm of the progressive movement. Learning the material in this course is a necessary prerequisite to success if success is defined as actually taming the administrative state.
Of course, that's the pornographic version of A Christmas Carol.
Actually rolling back the regulatory tsunami of the Biden and Obama administrations and proactively implementing conservative policies. Complaining about the administrative state or the deep state on TV or on op-eds accomplishes little. We have to do the hard work. Lastly, unless you learn this material, you will be able to implement only a fraction of your agenda, because many of the...
Man, you've said that like 3 or 4 times. We get it.
Rules that you do get out the door will not survive judicial review, that we struck down in a courtroom.
Hey, Lanzetta.
Make no mistake, any important rule will be litigated. The left has plenty of lawyers and plenty of sympathetic judges, and you cannot afford to needlessly give them successful avenues of attack. The history of the past century has seen each liberal or progressive administration come in and substantially or dramatically increase the regulatory burden on the American people and alter our society in increasingly progressive ways using the heavy hand of the federal government. Republicans typically reverse a very small proportion of the rules that the predecessor administration has put in place. Thus, the size, scope, and intrusiveness of the administrative state has been steadily increasing. The administrative state has also become a vital weapon in the left's effort to remake this country. The only marked exception to this ratchet effect was the Reagan administration in the 1980s. The process has accelerated quite dramatically in the 21st century. And the Biden administration is simply unprecedented in terms of the cost, scope, and number of rules it has finalized or proposed. A quick look at the most recent unified agenda of regulatory and deregulatory actions demonstrates that there is no end in sight. Now on to the fun part of this course. Just
What?
kidding. Before we get into the details,
Okay. All right. Cool. You know what? That landed for me. That landed for me.
onto the fun part of this course. Just kidding.
Dude, what must it be like to be this guy and you're just like, "Yeah, I'm the most boring person in the world. Don't worry, you want to hear a joke? It's just my everyday job." Haha.
Before we get into the details, let me address the basic structure of the rulemaking process. In general, the Administrative Procedure Act, or APA, requires an agency to publish in the Federal Register a notice of proposed rulemaking. This is often called the proposing release, or the NPRM. The agency must then receive comments from the public and address those comments in the document releasing the final rule. Among other things, the proposing release must contain the following 10 things: a summary of the proposed rule,
Okay.
information about how to provide comments on the proposed rule, the date by which the comments are due, or in other words, the comment period, the statutory authority for the proposed rule, an explanation of the rule and the reasons for the proposed rule, an initial regulatory flexibility analysis, a discussion of the likely impact of the proposed rule on small entities. If the rule requires the provision of information to the government by the public, an initial Paperwork Reduction Act analysis, an Office of Management and Budget Circular A4 compliant cost-benefit analysis, and other OMB required material, and then the actual proposed amendment to the Code of Federal Regulations, or CFR. Probably the best source of information.
I mean, I have to be honest with you, the on-screen graphics that were put up here are probably the single most valuable, like, shorthand you're going to get as far as notes go from, like, any of these videos on, like, how you actually put together new rules and regulations, you know?
Regarding the detailed requirements for drafting either an NPRM or final rule is the document drafting handbook prepared by the Office of the Federal Register, all 238 pages of it. The Administrative Conference of the United States, a government agency, has a lot of detailed information that can help address specific questions relating to the rulemaking process. Most of this sounds harder than it is, but it is time-consuming, requires significant attention to detail, and must be done correctly to accomplish your objective. It's not
Live for life. The correct stance to have.
optional. Once the public comments are in, you must evaluate and respond to those public comments in the final rule. By final rule here, I mean not just the revised CFR language, but the entire release containing the final rule. Among other things, the final rule must contain the following 10 things: a summary of the final rule, the statutory authority for the final rule, an explanation of the final rule and the reasons for the rule, a discussion of the comments made by various commentators, and the reasons why the agency accepted or rejected those comments. This discussion need not address each commentator individually by name, but it needs to address the issues raised by the commentators, or it may endanger the rule when it is subject to judicial review. A final regulatory flexibility analysis has to be included, a discussion of the likely impact of the final rule on small entities. If the rule requires the provision of information to the government by the public, a final paperwork reduction analysis has to be included, and an OMB circular A4 compliant cost benefit analysis and other OMB required material has to be in there as well. The actual final amendment to the CFR also has to be in there. It's usually at the very end of the final rule release. Lastly, it has to have an effective date of the final rule. It should be noted that generally a final rule cannot adopt a provision if the proposing release did not clearly provide notice to the public that.
Okay, genuine question here. How is this video another like 40 minutes long? Like, I feel like he's getting towards the end of like what the actual process is, and how on earth is he going to pad this out for another 30 minutes? 35 minutes even.
The agency was considering whether to adopt it. The courts have developed a so-called logical outgrowth test. In other words, the final rule must be a logical outgrowth of the proposed rule. If it is not, the court will probably decide that adequate notice was not provided to the public and strike down the rule. This is rare, but it does happen. And a judicial doctrine such as this is necessary to prevent agencies from effectively evading the APA notice and comment requirements. If you do decide that you want to substantially change your approach, it may be advisable to issue a revised NPRM and reopen the proposed rule for comments. At the very least, you should consult in-house counsel. Also consider that going forward with an approach that may result in a court invalidating a rule may be fatal because litigation can take years. You may be out of office by the time the case is decided, and your successor may be less committed to the rule or from the other party and simply opposed to it. I should also note that in certain instances, particularly if the agency is entering into a new field or the rulemaking is heavily dependent on empirical data, the proposed rule stage may be preceded by an advance notice of proposed rulemaking, an ANPRM, or a request for information, or RFI. These are designed to elicit data or ideas from the public prior to the issuance of a proposed rule, and it makes it much less likely that you will need to dramatically change direction.
This is mandatory, probably. Genuinely, I don't think... I think the vast majority of people that they get volunteering for this position understand what their marching orders are, which is to just do whatever Donald Trump says to do. And I don't think they're overly concerned about watching these training videos. But that being said, it tells us a lot about what the Heritage Foundation and, by extension, their backers think of the people who are coming in to actually do the dirty work of gutting the administration, and they think that they're morons.
And issue a second NPRM and reopen the proposed rule for comment. I estimate for the next administration to get the U.S. back to the level of regulation at the beginning of the Obama administration, hardly a regulatory nirvana. It will have to promulgate about 800 major rules. That is nearly one per business day for the entire duration of the administration. And because most political appointees will not be confirmed by the Senate until many months after the Inauguration Day, and because, as I will discuss later, of the Congressional Review Act, the time period in which this work must be done is actually much more truncated. Agencies only have...
I'm falling asleep over here. How could they make fascism so boring? At least yell a bit, say a dog whistle or something. Well, it's the thing, Frogurt Creme Brulee. Like, part of the normalization of fascism is making it boring, right? Which is why watching this, I think, is actually pretty important for us to know our enemy, Like, it's important to understand that making it boring and is somewhat synonymous with making it normal. It makes average people kind of check out, and they're like, well, that sounds bureaucratic, so it fits. It's the same thing basically. But if you actually pay attention to what's being said, he's describing how to roll back all the regulations from the past 4 years in order to bring, all the regulations, stuff that protects clean water, clean air, basic safety. He's talking about rolling all of those back without any indication of why they should be rolled back. And he's basically elaborating on the wet dream of kind of corporatism and why like corporations and businesses and capital in general tend to align with fascism. Like he's saying all of the things here and he's describing what they want to do, but the underlying processes here are very insidious, and I would describe them as evil. You know? Yeah, like it is a feature that they have boring videos in this training thing, because it also signals to the people who are signing up, people who, you know, don't have any idea what they're doing, that like, yes, it is very boring. And you know what, that's because what we're doing right now is normal. Like it doesn't set off any alarm bells for the people who are signing up thinking that they're making America great again, and not necessarily that aware that they're signing on to a fascist project, you know? And I don't know how many, let me put it this way. I don't think a lot of MAGA folk would self-describe as fascist, but if you start putting in more and more fascist language, that's going to send up an alarm bell, you know? Like, that's going to be like, wait a minute, are we the baddies? And they want to avoid that at all costs. And one of the best ways to do that is to be boring as shit.
Have the authority granted to them by Congress. Unfortunately,
is this corporatist fascism? I mean, I don't think that means much to say. Like, fascism is an unholy alliance between capital and government in that particular way. Like, I don't know that there's necessarily a difference between corporatist fascism and just fascism.
Congress is generally provided sweeping authority to most agencies.
Yeah, it makes it more like a
There
9 to
are,
5
however,
average
limits.
job to these people.
Any
on the ground.
rulemaking must point to a statute that grants the agency the authority to promulgate.
And by abstracting regulations to just be like, regulations are these big things that are bad, you know, by abstracting it that much, you know, they're foot soldiers in the administration here that are coming in. They're just like, yeah, we need to get rid of these regulations because they're evil. And it's like, which regulations are evil though? And like once you get into like one level below that of examining what is going on, suddenly it's like, well, they're saying that regulations that prevent pipelines from destroying groundwater reserves are bad. They want to remove those. You know, like it's like, oh, you want to remove this regulation that makes it more likely you're going to poison an entire town's water supply. Cool.
Promulgate the rule in question. In some cases, the grant of authority is breathtakingly broad. In other cases, it's more circumscribed. You need to become familiar with the relevant statutory language in the agency or agencies where you hope to work. Any rule that you choose to promulgate must fall within the statutory authority granted by Congress. Typically, this will not be a problem for conservatives, but you need to think through any potential issues, particularly for proactive rulemakings. As I will discuss later in more detail, under current Supreme Court cases, notably the 1984 case Chevron versus Natural Resources Defense Council.
Yeah, so what he's talking about here is that the Supreme Court overturned the Chevron doctrine, which is what he's referring to here. And Chevron doctrine basically allowed broad rulemaking authority for government agencies and protected them from being just sued by businesses nonstop and frivolously. And Chevron doctrine got overturned this past year, meaning that all regulations, both now and retroactively, can be grounds for litigation from businesses. So basically, the floodgates have opened for huge businesses to sue the U.S. government for making unfair regulations or overstepping their rulemaking authority, because now Chevron doctrine is gone. So that's fun.
Courts lean over backwards to permit agencies to get their way. This is starting to change. In 2022, in West Virginia versus EPA, the Supreme Court held that the major question doctrine requires that a clear statutory statement is necessary for a court to conclude that Congress intended to delegate regulatory authority to an agency with respect to major questions. During this Supreme Court term, in Loper Bright Enterprises versus Raimondo, the court will decide whether to reverse or modify Chevron
You're
itself.
welcome, Orion's End.
This case will be decided before the next administration takes office.
Yep. So basically what he's saying here is that there is a process for drafting these rules and regulations, but also don't.
The Administrative Procedure Act, enacted in 1946, provides the basic outline of how rulemaking is done. It also governs administrative hearings and other procedural matters, which we will not address here. Agencies promulgated 3,585 rules in 2022, 80 of which were deemed major rules. A major rule is defined generally as one that has resulted in or is likely to result in an annual effect on the economy of $100 million or more, a major increase in costs or prices for consumers, individual industries, federal, state, or local government agencies, or geographic regions, or 3, significant.
I mean, Ukrainian, like I clicked on the link to that tweet. That tweet has no citations whatsoever. It's just saying all of Trump's rural voters have exhausted themselves. And like, I'm gonna need some citations on that.
Significantly adverse effects on competition, employment.
Like we're gonna be seeing a lot of people in politics say a lot of crazy things over the next week and a half. Don't just take it at face value.
Investment, productivity, or innovation, or on the ability of the United States-based enterprise.
Like, don't take it at face value if it's good or bad. Like, just if it's good or bad, look into it a little bit more.
Enterprises to compete with foreign-based enterprises in domestic and export markets. 2,167 rules were promulgated during the first 8 months of this year, and more to come. So what is a rule? The APA defines a rule in relevant
Well, yeah, of course. Yeah, he's providing an authoritarian argument. All of these people know exactly why they're here and what the mission of Project 2025 is. And that is to turn Donald Trump into a dictator.
As, quote, the whole or a part of an agency statement of general or particular applicability and future effect designed to implement, interpret, or prescribe law or policy or describing the organization, procedure, or practice requirements
Uncle
of an
Tony, happy birthday to your sister. Might come back later depending on how late the stream goes. We'll see. Have fun.
That's a broad definition, but increasingly.
Hey, Sophie Bliss, thank you for gifting a membership over on the YouTube, and thank you for being the first person to support stream today. I really appreciate that.
The agencies have sought to evade the APA notice and comment requirement by issuing so-called guidance documents. Courts have largely let them get away with this. In principle, guidance documents do not have the force of law, unlike a rule. In practice, however, they do, since they inform the agency's enforcement posture. Few regulated entities take guidance documents casually, since ignoring them often results in being on the receiving end of an enforcement action. The Trump administration tried to police the use of guidance documents as a means to evade the APA when it issued Executive Order 13891 on October 9th, 2019. That order required each agency to post all guidance documents to a single searchable index website.
Oh God, Frogurt Creme Brulee, we're less than 2 weeks away. Yesterday it was 11 days. Today it's 10 days away from the election.
And subjected guidance documents to various requirements, including, notably, cost-benefit analysis.
Less than a week and a half.
This, in turn, resulted in an OMB memorandum, M-20-02, a few weeks later on October 31st, to implement the executive order. The Biden administration revoked Executive Order 13891 on its first day, so agencies are now free to return to their previous practices. Under Section 553 of the APA, interpretive rules, general statements of policy, or rules of agency, organization, procedure, or practice are exempt from the notice and comment requirements of the APA. So that raises the question, what is an interpretive rule? That's a good and difficult question. The courts are all over the map using different standards and different analysis. At least one court has said notice and comment is required if the rule creates new rights and duties. Others have asked whether the rule imposes a binding norm. If so, then it is subject to the notice and comment requirements. Others have used a four-part legal effect test. Others have asked whether the rule is truly interpretive or clarifying, as opposed to making a, quote, substantive change, end quote. There are related cases about what is and is not a general policy statement. But in general, if the statement is deemed non-binding, a court probably will not impose a notice and comment requirement.
Basically, he's describing how once, if Trump is elected here, the incoming people will simply ignore making rules, and instead bypass that by issuing guidance, which is far less cumbersome when it comes to like what you're required to put on paper and the number of bureaucratic gears that are required to turn. So he's really describing here, and I know it might be hard to parse because he's aggressively boring about it. What he's describing here is how to even bypass the bureaucratic steps of putting in regulations and rules.
This is also related to the guidance document question discussed a few minutes ago. And various administrations have tried to impose...
Wait, why is he talking? He is hurting Trump? Well, keep in mind, these are the leaked Project 2025 training videos. These were never intended for public consumption. That's why we're going over them. Like, these were all obtained by ProPublica from someone who leaked them from within the Project 2025 apparatus. And I just think that they're really important to go over because I think they reveal exactly what the incoming Trump administration would want to do. And so I'm kind of covering them, helping to parse them, and then putting them together into my own playlist. And hopefully that helps some people figure out what exactly is going on here.
Various requirements on different types of interpretive rules and guidance documents. Finally, the potentially evolving Supreme Court Chevron deference doctrine will have an impact on all of this. If the Loper Bright Enterprises case circumscribes deference...
So why make these vids? Well, they made them for internal use to train people because, and this is maybe an underreported aspect of Project 2025, but part of Project 2025's goal was not just to say, like, here's our agenda wish list that we want for a new president. It was also to recruit thousands upon thousands of people from the MAGA movement, Trump loyalists, in order to replace bureaucrats in the U.S. government. Basically, they want to bring thousands of people, politically appoint them, and put them in charge of the bureaucratic machinery and then systematically break that machinery. So these videos were intended to train those incoming bureaucrats who might now know nothing about what like a political appointee does. These videos are supposed to train them into how to become effective political yes men for Donald Trump.
Then courts will be less willing to accept it.
Well, that's the thing, Rivalry. None of what is described in these videos is a crime. That's the scariest part about it. They aren't discussing doing anything illegal here. Everything in these videos is within the bounds of law. Which is scarier because if they were illegal, you could simply submit these videos and be like, yeah, look, illegal. But that's not really on the table. Okay, I need to go use the bathroom. I'll be right back. BRB. It's a setup to do something potentially illegal. Well, no. See, here's the part you don't seem to understand, Rivalry. Like, if you just change the law, if you get into positions of power to change the law, then you can do something that currently would be illegal, but after you change the law is no longer illegal. Like, that's the thing. That's the insidious nature about Project 2025. It understands how our system works, and thus they can get around the illegalities of it. You can argue that it's bad, because, yeah, a fascist takeover of America is bad. Is it strictly illegal? Unfortunately, no. Or would it be strictly illegal in this particular formulation of it? Unfortunately, no. The law is not necessarily on our side here. How did they get this amount of people and kept every one of them silent? They didn't. That's why we have leaked training videos. Yeah, it is fucking disgusting, but none of what Project 2025 is doing is strictly illegal. Sadly. Let's dive back in, shall we?
Face value, the agency's designation of a rule as interpretive.
Again, it's why Project 2025 doesn't have to be a secret conspiracy. Like, they can just do it out in the open, because they're not doing anything that's strictly illegal.
Now, what should you, as a potential political appointee, make of all this? My recommendation is this. If the proposed rule matters a lot to you, don't try to circumvent the notice and comment requirements by deeming the rule interpretive.
Hey, trans girl Jade.
Obviously, the notice and comment requirements
Hey, Pastor Dean.
impose costs and consume limited time, but failing to run that gauntlet gives opponents one more angle of attack as they seek to overturn the rule in court. Moreover, doing so will also make it that much harder for a future progressive administration to reverse the rule.
Yeah, again, they're like, and even if we don't win, like, even if we don't succeed in our fascist takeover, like, we're still gonna make it impossible to, like, return to regulation as normal.
I would also strongly urge
you did not miss the
that you
third-party
seek
debate,
advice from
second
in-house
half.
counsel, provided that they're genuine administrative law experts, and seek advice from administrative law experts in the conservative policy community.
Guidance. Like, it is pretty incredible that they're like, well, basically, in practice, you can get around doing any of these things for rules by just calling it guidance instead.
While on the subject of guidance document, let me mention one more important thing. Because they are not rules, they are much easier to get rid of than rules. They can simply be withdrawn by an incoming administration. Easy come, easy go. And in the vast majority of cases, Biden administration guidance should be withdrawn. Those monitoring a given agency should be preparing a running list of guidance documents issued during the Biden years and evaluate those documents. Those that need to be withdrawn should be identified now, and the new conservative administration should simply withdraw them within a week. Then, new alternative guidance can be issued. Preferably, actual rules implementing a conservative policy agenda will soon follow. The APA imposes no statutory minimum comment period. A comment period shorter than 30 days, however, is almost unheard of. 60 or 90 days is more normal, especially for complex or controversial rules. The Biden administration, however, has been criticized for its excessively short comment periods. The APA does require that final rules be published 30 days prior to their effective date. The APA requires a concise general statement of a rule's basis and purpose. Concise is in the eyes of the beholder, but most such statements in proposing releases and final rules are not particularly concise. And there's a reason for this. It's judicial review. The agency needs to show that its rule has a basis in law and in fact to survive judicial review, particularly the arbitrary and capricious standard. So you will need to put significant effort into explaining why your proposed rule makes sense from a legal, policy, and economics perspective. The APA requires the agency to provide notice and receive comments with respect to legislative or substantive rules. In your final rule, you need to address the issue raised by these comments. You do not need to accept the recommendations made in the comments. You do not need to address each comment separately. You do need to address legitimate issues and concerns raised by the comments in the final release and explain why you accept or reject the point made in the comment. Otherwise, you risk a court determining that your actions were arbitrary and capricious. This process can be tedious and time-consuming, but it is absolutely necessary. Comments are part of the formal regulatory record.
I like that even this guy's like, yeah, our entire job is basically a unending batch of misery. And that's just the way we like it.
Or docket, and may be referred to by litigants. In fact, they usually are. Agencies sometimes issue what are called interim final rules or temporary rules. These rules are sometimes colloquially called emergency rules. Such rules take effect immediately, but then a comment period is open. The APA permits this if the agency, for, quote, good cause, finds and incorporates the finding in a brief statement of reasons therefor in the rules issued, that notice and public procedure thereon are impractical, unnecessary, or contrary to the public interest.
Now, this is interesting here because he's basically starting to get to like, hey, if you had a bad faith actor in here that was working on behalf of Donald Trump, they could just issue this emergency type of guidance, this emergency, what is the
impractical incorporates the finding and if the agency, for, quote, comment period is open. Such rules take
emergency rules. Like you could pass emergency rules and basically have no kind of oversight about it whatsoever. The public doesn't even get to comment until after the rule is already in place. Like you don't even have to technically allow a comment period on an emergency rule, even if like there's potentially good reason, if you just find good reason for there not to be one. So like, again, a bad actor in one of these positions can cause all kinds of headaches and chaos. And he's basically encouraging people signing up to be the headache and be the chaos.
The notice and public procedure thereon are impractical, unnecessary, or contrary to the public interest. End quote. The agency must consider post-effective date public comments and in principle should modify the rule in light of those comments and will then adopt a final rule. These rules are subject to judicial review like any other final rules, but of course the issue of whether or not there was actual good cause is also at issue. As to the issue of whether good cause is shown, in general, courts will let this happen if the agency is responding to something beyond its control rather than just trying to accelerate the regulatory process for political reasons.
Is there any chance that this system can be reviewed and revised after this, or is that just how we're going to keep going about business? Well, this is how we have been going about business. And so, like, it's taken it's taken a couple hundred years for our country to reach a point where, like, people are like, hey, we could actually just, get into office and do things like this. And up until now, there's kind of been like this gentleman's agreement to, like, just not do that. But the gentleman's agreement has been broken for a long time now. And so, like, what is being described here is essentially like, yeah, throw all that notion about, like, civic duty into the garbage, okay? You're here to serve Donald Trump. And once you get rid of that sense of civic duty, that opens a lot of avenues for fascism, frankly. Our system was never really impervious to this. And it was largely just seen as too big of a political liability to openly advocate for this. And now Donald Trump has cultivated a base of support that no longer feels that, overtly saying and doing fascist things is a liability. And so that opens the possibility gates to this, Project 2025, and the fascist takeover of America. Now, is it possible to reform the system? Absolutely it is. Will neoliberals or even liberals do that? Probably not. Because they're weak and feckless, and they'll think, well, the danger is past. That's that. And we really need to get our act together here as leftists to make sure that, like, we can get into positions of power before fascists do in the future. Because if they beat us to the punch, we're kind of all screwed. So, like, we don't have the luxury of going back to sleep after this election, I'm sorry to say.
For your information, part of Project 2025, called Pillar 4 or the 180-Day Playbook, is developing potential rulemakings for the next conservative administration.
Yeah, so what he's saying here is that the Heritage Foundation, as well as the associated think tanks that gathered around and supported Project 2025 at the behest of their billionaire donors, have already pre-written emergency rules and potential, like, rules and guidance for an incoming conservative administration. This isn't something where, like, they'll even need to think about what kind of plan to implement. They already have the plans pre-written for them, You
should become aware of the work being done with respect to the agency or agencies where you hope to work. Moreover, this effort needs your participation. A document called the Unified Agenda of Regulatory and Deregulatory Actions is one that you should become familiar with. Most of it is required by the Regulatory Flexibility Act, but some of the requirements are a function of Executive Order 12866, as amended. It can be accessed at www.reginfo.gov/public. And once you're there, click on the Unified Agenda and Regulatory Plan. You can sort by agency and determine what rules they're working on, including...
Tina, welcome, Raiders. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Folks, go follow Tina_2, TOO. Excellent political content creator over there. Friend of the show. Let's go! Tina Raiders in! Is this a new... It's not a new one. We're still going over the old ones that leaked like 2 months ago.
Rules.
But we only have 3 more left, 2 after this one.
That have yet to be proposed. This will enable you to track what the Biden administration is doing in the regulatory space and what it plans to do. But you also need to become familiar with this because you will be required to provide similar information once you're in office. This is a joint effort of the Office of Information and Regulatory Affairs at OMB, called OIRA, and the Regulatory Information Service Center at the GSA. OMB and its Office of Information and Regulatory Analysis, or OIRA, plays a crucial role in the regulatory process. The administrator of OIRA is often called by the media the regulatory czar. OIRA's website is whitehouse.gov/OMB/information-regulatory-affairs. You need to spend some time there. OIRA is a very small agency, too small actually. It has a staff of about 50. A conservative administration should increase its staffing levels considerably. 50 people are not enough to adequately police the regulatory actions of the entire federal government. OIRA is one of the few government agencies that limits the regulatory ambitions of other agencies. There are a few others, like the SBA's Office of Advocacy, but OIRA is by far the most important. The two most important things it does, at least in my opinion, is enforce the Paperwork Reduction Act and Executive Order 12866 as augmented by OMB Circular A4. OIRA reviews draft of proposed and final regulations, and in my judgment, working with OIRA closely will generally make your rulemakings better. OIRA also coordinates a retrospective review of regulation under Executive Order 13610. It oversees the implementation of government-wide policies in the areas of information policy, privacy, and statistical policy. OIRA also coordinates agency implementation of the Information Quality Act and the implementation of SBREFA, the Small Business Regulatory Enforcement and Fairness Act. Executive Order 12866 was originally adopted by President Clinton. It has been amended several times, most recently by President Biden's Executive Order 14094. The Biden Executive Order, among other things, increases the threshold.
Chatters will be able to infiltrate the Heritage Foundation. True, but also they'll be able to articulate what is happening with this whole Project 2025 thing.
Threshold of a, quote, significant regulatory action to $200 million from $100 million requires that the regulatory analysis recognize distributive impacts and equity and takes various steps regarding the promotion of inclusive regulatory policy. OMB Circular A4 lays out in detail how cost-benefit analysis should be done and other regulatory requirements. Needless to say, the Biden administration has proposed amending Circular A4 in a manner that will let far more regulations pass muster. For example, it would reduce discount rates for assessing future costs and benefits from 3 to 7% to 1.7%. The fact that 30-year Treasury securities, effectively risk-free, currently yield over 4% apparently doesn't matter. It mandates more emphasis on distributional effects and requires the treatment of different people's costs and benefits differently. Affluent people's costs, for example, will be weighted less than low-income people's costs, for example.
Yeah, because they're affluent. They have more, so their costs are weighted less, yeah.
On a declining marginal utility of income theory. An incoming conservative administration will presumably revoke Executive Order 14094 and revise OMB Circular A4 to something more like what it looked like prior to the Biden administration. Hopefully this will happen with alacrity. OIRA review only applies to significant regulatory actions as defined in the executive order. There are both monetary and non-monetary standards. What you need...
Oh, God. If you're watching the current election cycle and you think J.D. Vance is going to be anywhere near the presidency if Trump loses this current election, like, that's crazy. That's crazy out of touch. J.D. Vance is like one of the most risless ghouls that the Republican Party has ever conjured up. It's honestly pretty incredible. He's only like a marginally more rizful individual than this guy. And that's saying something.
Need to know is that you must ensure that your agency complies with these rules as revised. Compliance is not optional. OIRA has the authority to return
Oh, that is lovely. Did someone buy couchfucker.org and have it redirect to JD Vance? That's pretty funny.
a rule to an agency for noncompliance. Moreover, poor cost-benefit analysis is a common reason why courts invalidate rules.
Why is he slurring his words? Because he's racist Santa, okay? He's gotten into the eggnog. Leave him alone. This is all he's got. This is his time to shine.
In most cases where an agency is proposing to require the public to produce information to the government, the 1980 Paperwork Reduction Act requires that agencies obtain an OMB control number, produce burden hour estimates, and ultimately to get OIRA clearance. Under the Paperwork Reduction Act, or PRA, if an agency is going to institute a new information collection requirement, it must place a notice in the Federal Register separate from and before the proposed rule and seek public comment, and then later provide notice that OIRA...
Basically, he's describing the process for, like, putting regulations, guidance, rules into effect, and, like, what all of that entails, and he's making it clear that, it can be a lot of work unless you take these very easy shortcuts to fascism.
Clearance has been requested by the agency. Then it must get OIRA clearance. All this is prior to releasing a proposed rule. It would be my estimate that this process typically adds about 6 months to the overall rulemaking process, but it only applies to a rule that requires the public to provide information to the government.
Hello, little Morphine Annie.
The Regulatory Flexibility Act, or RFA, was enacted in 1980. The statute has been amended several times since then. The RFA requires an agency to do an initial regulatory flexibility analysis, or IRFA, in its proposed rule. In response to comments and any changes in the rule, a final regulatory flexibility analysis is also required in the release of the final rule.
What I find fascinating here is that he's giving a lot of procedural information that is accurate and true. But, like, what's interesting to me is that every so often he'll veer off of just delivering, like, process information to just, like, talking about how regulations are the devil, or, like, you know, silly things like making sure rich people's costs are weighted lesser than poor people's costs. Or need to be repealed, or that, like, the Biden administration really has passed so many regulations, and it's like, okay, it's pretty clear what you're trying to do. All right, we're gonna fix all of that. Did y'all watch Rogan with Trump? I watched clips of it. I ain't got 3 hours to spare to watch that, unfortunately.
Agencies must assess the effects of the regulations on small entities, which the RFA defines to include small businesses, small governmental jurisdictions, and small not-for-profit organizations. The agency must estimate the number of small entities affected by the proposed and final rule. It requires the agency to specifically and publicly address regulatory comments by the SBA's Office of Advocacy. IRFAs are also required to contain a description of any significant alternatives to the proposed rule which accomplish the stated objectives of the proposed rule and which minimize any significant economic impact of the proposed rule on small entities. Further, the agency must discuss different types of flexibilities that could be included in the rule, including the establishment of differing compliance or reporting requirements, or different...
I mean, I guess I could see, like, a Trump Jr. Eric Trump ticket, but I frankly, I think that's a level of nepotism that people wouldn't go along with. And also, let's be real, the cult of personality around the Trump, you know, sons is a pale shadow of what Donald Trump experiences. You know, like, they don't got the sauce. They don't have his charisma. And unfortunately for them, that's like what Donald Trump is good at. They don't have it. They don't have the juice.
Timetables that take into account the resources available to small entities. It also has to consider an exemption from.
Also, welcome, Raiders. For those of you who are like, what the hell is this? We're going over Project 2025 videos. We have 2 more left after this, but we're not going to do those today. And these are the leaked videos that ProPublica got their hands on that train the people that Project 2025 is recruiting as Trump loyalists to serve as essentially appointed bureaucrats that will oversee the dismantling and disintegration of the administrative state and facilitate the fascist takeover of America with Donald Trump as a dictator. Like that's the Project 2025 plan that we're going over right now. And this guy is literally the most boring man alive. And I presume he's still alive at this, as I record this. I don't know that for sure. But he's describing the process by which you could like subvert different pieces of legislation and by like declaring emergency rules or issuing guidance as opposed to a regulation or a rule. You know, like he's basically describing how you would go about doing this while providing like, you know, accurate information about how the system functions.
From coverage of the rule or any part of it for such small entities. The RFA imposes a whole series of other obligations that are more tangentially related to the regulatory process, such as mandating small entity compliance guides and the establishment of small business review panels.
I mean, it's not even really accelerationist. They're just achieving their
Mandates Reform
goal.
Act of 1995 is designed to address federal legislation or regulation that imposes an enforceable duty on state, local, or tribal governments, whether that involves costs or impedes their ability to collect revenue without a corresponding funding mechanism from the federal government. An agency that may impose such costs must provide a variety of information.
These would have to be all executive orders. Well, no, what's being described is government agencies that exist, like the EPA, for example, operate with by imposing regulations, by regulating, you know, air quality, water quality, soil quality, etc. Protecting it from, you know, companies just pouring chemicals into your local groundwater, you know, and they do that by issuing guidance, regulations, rules, etc. And so these aren't executive orders. Donald Trump, however, can issue executive orders, and he can also give marching orders that are not like formal to all of those organizations that are, you know, downstream from him, to go with the water metaphor some more. This is fascism. Like it is the consolidation of power into the office of the presidency. The Supreme Court has given the office of the president basically carte blanche to do anything without any legal repercussions. And why isn't this illegal? Well, because our founding fathers basically had a lot of gentlemen's agreements, and like those gentlemen's agreements became like unspoken kind of conduct rules for people in positions of power after, you know, a few centuries. But then, you know, Reagan came in, and a lot of people since then came in, and those gentlemen's agreements no longer hold that much relevance in our current political time. And so all of the expectations of good and fair and honest dealings have been thrown out. And when you throw all of those out, our system has no safeguards, really. When we're talking about stuff like this, anyway.
Including an estimate of the cost being imposed in both the proposing release and in the final rule. The Federal Register has been with us since 1936. As I have
Well, and also, like, if Donald Trump gets into office, no law would ever prevent them from doing illegal things anyway, because he could just pardon the people doing the illegal things, you know, like he has already done last time he was in office. So, like, you know, there's not really a safeguard to prevent this from happening. Even were it to involve illegal actions, he could simply absolve them immediately after they did them.
discussed, all notices, proposed rules, and final rules must be published in the Federal Register. These documents have to be drafted in compliance with the rules promulgated by the Office of the Federal Register. The document drafting handbook published by the Office of the Federal Register lays out the details. First published in 1938, the 50-title Code of Federal Regulations, or CFR, is the codification of regulations promulgated by the executive departments and other agencies of the federal government. Almost any rule that you...
Oh, okay. I'm not surprised that a Christian nationalist is in favor of a Christian fascism. But keep in mind that, are you the right kind of Christian to be a Christian nationalist? That's that genuine question. Like, are you the kind of Christian that would actually benefit from Christian nationalism? Because Christian nationalists don't stand for all Christians. Like, they just don't. Like, the entire history of Europe is thousands of years of Christians fighting and killing each other over obscure theological differences. And if you think a fascist coming into power with the mandate of evangelical Christians would somehow not devolve into that, you just don't know your history. And you also are not familiar with how fragmented the evangelical church in America is.
promulgate will involve an amendment.
Let them fight among themselves. Well, that's the problem, Lib for Life. They would first focus on all of their mutual enemies before turning inward. Like, so what that would mean would be that they would, you know, kill gay people, kill trans people, you know, do a mass ethnic cleansing, you know, possibly a genocide of, you know, non-white people. And then it would turn inward. You cannibalize your own last.
Or addition to the Code of Federal Regulations. The CFR is also published by the Office of the Federal Register. The online version is updated on a rolling basis and is available at...
Whoa, damn. Pastor Dean, do you have a video that explains everything and why I should be a Christian nationalist? I would love to see that.
ecfr.gov. You will need to check any agency-specific regulatory requirements for the agency where you hope to work. As I will discuss in a minute, these are typically imposed by Congress, but some may be imposed by an agency's own rules and procedures. The Congressional Review Act was adopted as part of the Small Business Regulatory Enforcement Fairness Act in 1996. It allows Congress, in the form of a joint resolution of disapproval, to consider legislation to overturn rules. The disapproval resolution cannot be filibustered in the Senate. If a CRA joint resolution of disapproval is approved by both houses of Congress and signed by the President, or if Congress successfully overrides a presidential veto, the rule at issue cannot go into effect or continue in effect. With three fairly narrow exceptions, it adopts the APA definition of a rule. The CRA requires agencies to submit their rules to both houses of Congress and the Government Accountability Office, or GAO, before they may take effect. Now, there is a clock on CRA disapproval resolutions. The disapproval resolution must be introduced in the period beginning on the date which the agency gave.
True. Good point, Foxbat. Always point out that trad cats are basically an unacknowledged heresy due to the fact that they rejected Vatican II. Exactly. They rejected the word of the Pope. Like, they're picking and choosing Pope sayings, and in their theology, the Pope is the voice of God on earth, essentially. Hey, Sake Tanuki. I have never posted a link. I never posted a link, nor would I ever. I mean, I where can I find this video that explains Christian nationalism? I would love to be a convert to the cause.
Notice to Congress and ending 60 days thereafter, excluding days either House of Congress, the House or the Senate, is adjourned for more than 3 days. If a rule is submitted to Congress fewer than 60 working days before it adjourns its final session, i.e. adjourns sine die, a new period for congressional review becomes available in the incoming Congress. The disapproval resolution must use specific language, although it's simple, to wit, that Congress disapproves the rules submitted by name of agency relating to the name of rule, and such rules shall have no force or effect. That's it. The CRA has been used successfully about 20 times. It usually is used by an incoming Congress and a new president to reverse so-called midnight regulations by a previous administration of the other party. There are two morals to this story. First, make sure that your rule is submitted to Congress and the GAO as required, so that the CRA clock starts running. Some agencies have actually blown this in the past. Second, try to get your rule out more than 60 legislative days before Congress adjourns sine die, if a new administration might take office, so that the disapproval resolution clock will have expired.
Yeah, basically he's explaining, here's how you do this so that, your regulations, your good ones, don't get overturned.
Determining the date for the 60-day clock can be a bit challenging, since you don't necessarily know what Congress's calendar in its second session will look like ahead of time. Appropriations bills or riders are regularly used to affect the regulatory process. They usually take the form of, quote, no funds are appropriated or otherwise made available by law shall be used to ... end quote. The ... would be filled in with the rule that you're trying to affect. Congress uses this very often to stop regulations that it wants to put an end to. And it works, but it needs to be included in each annual appropriations bill to remain in effect. You need to also be aware of any such appropriations riders relating to your agency that are in effect. In principle, an appropriations bill could require that funds be used to develop, propose, and finalize the regulation, but I am unaware of that actually being done via the appropriations process. Rulemaking mandate.
Is this guy joking? The people he's lecturing don't know what day it is on a normal one. They shift the goalpost every other Tuesday. Well, that's the thing, Stardust Bun. Like, it doesn't matter if the people coming into the administration actually watch this or not, because their only role, and the role that has been reinforced by almost every single one of these videos, is to do whatever Donald Trump tells them to do. And this is really just, this video in particular is deviating a bit from that, because it's actually full of like, here is the process to actually put regulations into practice, which is something that you will need to do if you are a political appointee coming in. And so like, this is probably one of those, and it's probably one of the reasons why this guy was talking about this as a course. This is probably one of the main things they're pushing as like, you do genuinely need to have a grasp on at least some of these ideas in this video in order to make sure you are effective as a fascistic bureaucrat.
In non-appropriations bills are quite common. They usually impose unrealistic deadlines, and agencies routinely blow through the deadlines. But eventually they get the job done, sometimes years late. The speed with which the agency addresses the rulemaking mandate from Congress is, of course, related to whether those running the agency support the proposed rulemaking. These requirements vary substantially as to the substantive specificity of the rulemaking requirement. Sometimes they just impose a requirement that the agency promulgate a rule about some issue.
Yeah, also most of these videos have basically been, don't do obvious crimes before, Donald Trump gets into office, and also don't post on social media that you're a racist. And also do whatever Donald Trump tells you, he'll pardon you.
Sometimes they're quite specific about what the agency must do, down to the paragraph that needs to be added or deleted. Rulemaking moratoriums are much less common.
Oh, you'd love to see what's on my t-shirt? Here, one second. It's my partner's lingerie brand. We are making gender euphoric lingerie. It's hard to see because it's on my boob curve, but yeah, it's one of our pre-launch pieces of merch from the Imogene Olivia website. But yeah, we're making trans-inclusive lingerie that appeals to trans femmes and folks who just want to feel femme. It's made for people who want to tuck, people who don't want to tuck, people who want to actively enhance their bottom fit, depending on where they're at with their bottom journeys. And also, we have expanded sizing to accommodate a lot of different kinds of bodies. So we are in the process of getting our final checks done to then send out our garment to the factory for mass production sounds weird because we're not doing mass production, but factory production, I guess. Will you drop that link again? Absolutely. Also, this shirt is just banging. It's just a good shirt. Also, I do have to put a content warning. My butt is on the front of the Imogene Olivia website because we needed to file a trademark that included someone wearing the underwear, and so I had to step in a moment of crisis. But my butt, via this website and our trademarking, is on the front page of the Imogene Olivia lingerie website at the moment. So yes, butt. River buns, Jack, exactly. It is clad. It's tasteful, but I am saying heads up on that one. Oh, the video's not uploaded yet. Well, that's very inconvenient for your attempt to say that you have a video that explains everything. All right. May I respectfully compliment that butt? You may respectfully make compliments as much as you would like, as long as they're respectful.
But they happen. I've gotten them done in the past myself. You need to be familiar with any rulemaking
Doom
requirements
Patrol's a
or
banging show, John
prohibitions
Bainbridge.
imposed by statute for your agency. Lawsuits challenging important rulemakings are virtually inevitable. You should expect that any rule you promulgate will be challenged.
Hey, fact check. Genuine question. Genuine question. By what mechanism will a vote for Jill Stein stop the genocide? What is the sequence of events in your mind? Respectfully, I'm not here to dunk on you. Vote Jill Stein, Kamala Harris, and Donald Trump. No, that's not an answer to the question, though. You're just spamming the same message. Genuine question. How would a vote for Jill Stein end anything? What's the mechanism? What's the sequence of events? Walk me through it a little bit. Because, like, I don't really see a pathway to victory here. Like, she's not even on the ballot in every state. Like, just real quick. I know we're detracting a bit from the segment we're doing, but just real quick here. Here's the Jill Stein ballot access map and status, and we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Sorry, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 states. There are 11 states where she's not on the ballot. She's not even on the ballot in over a fifth of the states. So, like, when I see that, I don't feel like that's a very serious campaign. And so I don't see a pathway there for victory. So is there a pathway for Jill Stein to win the election? Maybe that's an easier question to ask. Weapons embargo, she promised on day one. Also, she'll fight the climate crisis. That's not a pathway to victory. Those are policy positions. Policy positions I agree on, by the way, but those are policy positions. What is her pathway to winning the election? Like, in what universe does a vote for Jill Stein get her elected to president? I want to know what universe that is so I can understand your point of view a little bit more. I mean, like, if the answer is just kind of silence, like, I get it. Because there's not a pathway to victory here that I can see. She's not polling at a high enough rate to actually win in any state. She's not even on the ballot in over 20% of the states. Like, this is not deeply serious to me. So, I again agree with her on many of the policy prescriptions she has, but there's not a pathway here, unfortunately. If there was a pathway for Jill Stein to win and bring an end to the genocide in Gaza, I would support that. But sadly, that is not an option on the table.
Challenge in the courtroom and draft your rule. The proposing release and the final release.
Wait. Okay. If Democrats broke away from the collective mindset of voting for a two-party system, we would see Jill Stein as president. If Kamala would simply not support Israel, I would vote for her. Well, here's the thing, right? Part of the issue is that the way our elections work consolidate political power into a two-party duopolistic system. The only way to break that is on a state-by-state level, passing ranked choice voting. And the Green Party doesn't really push for that in any systematic way that I can see. They just tend to show up every 4 years with generally good positions, but very little political power. And what needs to happen is the political power they do have needs to go into building a ground game on local and state levels to get the ranked choice voting passed. Because until that happens, third parties aren't really an option. And saying, well, more Democrats should abandon the party, like, is all well and good, but like, to me, it's like saying, well, I don't want to walk 5 miles to the store, so I will simply teleport. And there's not actually a mechanism for teleportation. So you just stand there mired in wishful thinking and not actually getting basic things done, like going to the store and getting groceries. So, yeah. I want to be able to teleport. I want good policy positions to be enacted. But unfortunately, like, it needs to be possible. Power needs to be built and wielded. And it's just not being built and wielded by the Green Party.
Assuming that will happen. You need to dot your procedural I's and cross your regulatory process T's. If you don't, then all of your work will be for naught. Chevron deference, discussed to some extent previously.
I can't vote for the lesser of two evils, I'm sorry. That's fine. I'm not criticizing your decision to vote for Kamala Harris. Or not vote for Kamala Harris. I'm explaining my rationale for not understanding how voting for Jill Stein achieves your goal. I don't see how voting for Jill Stein improves the situations of people in Gaza, when as far as I can see it, like, you either have someone who's openly in favor of genociding Palestinians and who is supported by Netanyahu and Israel broadly, which is Donald Trump. And then you have someone who is relatively spineless and easily influenced on a whole host of issues, including Israel. And I think that Kamala Harris can, of the two candidates that are in the two-party duopoly, she can be influenced to a better position. We saw some indication that she was trying to portray the killing of Yahya Sinwar as like an off-ramp from what's happening in Gaza. But again, she's vice president. She's not going to be able to do anything unless she actually wins. And she can't really break with the president of the United States now when she needs institutional support. So, like, all things kind of analyzed here, like, to me, it just seems like what winds up happening is that we have two options. Both are bad. One is clearly far worse. And I'll take the bad option that might be improved into a, I'm not even going to say like good or passable option, but a slightly better than it is now option. Does that make sense? Let's see.
It's about courts providing deference to agencies with respect to statutory interpretation. As the court put it, quote, if the statute is silent or ambiguous with respect to the specific issue, the question for the court is whether the agency's answer is based on a permissible construction of the statute. Not best construction, not the most logical construction, not the construction most consistent with demonstrated congressional intention, but a permissible construction. As I mentioned, the Loper Bright Enterprises versus Raimondo case before the Supreme Court this term may revisit this. For now, the standard effectively...
Lonnie Jaquez, what are you on about? Are you okay? Are you having a mental breakdown? There are some phone numbers you could call. There's like the National Suicide Hotline if you're having like a serious mental breakdown. Like, how on earth have you been able to interpret anything that I've said as like being pro-Trump? This is literally like part 27 of an anti-Trump video series that I've been doing. So I don't know exactly where you're coming from on that one. That's where you'd like to take it? I mean, yeah, you seem deeply unhinged and unwell. Are you okay? Like, you're doing some weird, like, transphobia and also, like, all capsing, and you're not even able to spell the username right, and it's written, like, right on the screen, like in front of you, like you can see what channel you're watching, right? Like you know how to spell the username that you're trying to at in the YouTube chat. So I'm assuming you're under some amount of mental distress. Okay, I might have misunderstood. Yeah, you might have misunderstood, but also, like, you seem to have, in your misunderstanding, jumped immediately to being virulently transphobic in a way that, like, I don't mind if people direct transphobia to me, per se. Like, that's fine. You know, I'm a content creator on the internet. It happens. But I can't allow you to be in my community if, like, someone disagrees with you and you immediately jump to being transphobic. You understand that, right? Like, the same way I wouldn't allow anyone in my community who, if someone disagrees with them, they immediately drop the N-word. You know, I can't... I can't do that. So, like, you have to go away now, and I'm sorry. But you can't exist in polite society, and if you know, change, grow, whatever, make a new account, maybe you'll do better next time. But, like, immediately jumping to bigotry because someone disagrees with you is pretty disgusting behavior. And it wouldn't be allowed in a classroom full of 5-year-olds, and it certainly shouldn't be allowed in a group of adults. There you go. You can scream in your own impotent void.
Government's lawyer can string together a rational argument for the agency position.
You acted like you're MAGA. Yeah, because I talked about understanding why someone would vote for third party, which I do. I understand why someone would be disillusioned with Democrats. Democrats aren't... like, I'm a socialist, guys. Democrats aren't necessarily my friends in most cases, but right now they're the only bulwark against fascism we have, and out of necessity we need to vote for them or we die. So, like, that's the issue here. You know, if you don't understand how someone could possibly criticize Kamala Harris, this is not the channel for you. I criticize people on all sides of the political spectrum. If you can't handle that like an adult, then you are not mature enough to be here. And, like, you can have political disagreements with me, that's fine. We've literally got a person in chat calling themselves Lib for Life, and that's fine. I'm not a liberal, I'm a socialist. But folks can be here even if they disagree with me, but you have to be able to, like, communicate with respect. Are we allowed to spell things the way the way that we want to? I mean, I guess that's a weird question to ask, but you can spell things the way you want. Whether or not other people will make fun of you is an entirely different matter.
If so, they win.
We got some real we got some real weirdos here today, folks.
Or Seminole Rock deference is even more problematic, at least to me. Our is a 1997 Supreme Court case, and Seminole Rock is a 1945 Supreme Court case. Those cases stand for the proposition that courts will show deference to an agency's interpretation of its own rule, unless it is plainly erroneous or inconsistent with the regulation. Now, this provides a tremendous incentive for agencies to write bad rules with massive ambiguity.
If a boy can be a girl and a girl can be a boy, why can't a spoon be a fork, and why can't I spell things the way I want? You can spell things the way you want. Wait, okay, let's break this down real quick for you, Pastor Dana, okay? So, boys can identify as a gender other than boy. Girls can identify as a gender other than girl. And when someone identifies as something, we kind of just go like, okay, yeah, sure. You identify as a pastor. And I just go, okay, you're a pastor. I accept that. It's a social role that we're talking about. It's a place within society that we're talking about. Could we say something other than spoon and refer to, like, the actual physical object with a different word? Yeah, we could. Why don't we? Is an interesting question, but it boils down to, frankly, like, we decided that, like, that is just the social categorization that we're going to choose for it. We're gonna call this a spoon, we're gonna call that a fork. And guess what? That's not set in stone. Over time, language changes. That's why you can look up like the etymology of words and see how the same word was interpreted differently over time and had different meanings put in for it. Interestingly enough, you walked right into an example of that with the term girl. Girl used to refer to both boys and girls. It was not a gendered term. You would just call, or I might be getting it reversed. Was it girl that referred to both, or boy referred to both? I think girl. Girl meant any young child. All children were girls. And so right there, you've walked into a position where, like, yeah, if you start spelling something differently or you start using a word outside of its conventional meaning, and other people also pick that up and start using it outside of its conventional meaning, then you've successfully created a new meaning for the word. So, like, this is actually a way of how social convention guides language, and I think that's really, really fascinating stuff. And, like, if you want to adopt, like, a different spelling of a word, you certainly can. There are tons of differences between British English and US American English. You know, like, those are huge differences. Spelled differently mean roughly the same thing. So you can actually gain acceptance for, like, different spellings of words that go beyond conventions. Now, that is, however, all different from identity, because we tend to treat different identities differently. And so when we talk about gender identity is just the gender you identify as, right? And that can be the same as the one that you were assigned at birth, or it can be different from the one you were assigned at birth. If it's different, then you're called a transgender individual, because you identify as a different gender than what you were assigned at birth. If you're talking about the biological aspect of it, well, it turns out that if you get on, like, HRT or puberty blockers, like, that has effects on your biology. We know that different chemicals have different effects on our biology because that's literally how babies become adults. Like, that's literally part of the process. Chemicals flood your body, you grow, you turn into an adult. So on both levels of, like, biology and social society, yeah, like, when you transition, you can both transition in a gender identity sense, and you can transition in a biological sense. These are two things. And because of modern medicine, that is possible now. So that, I hope that answers your question. I have a feeling it was intended to be more rude than how I treated it, but I hope that answers your question.
In the rules language so that the agency retains the maximum amount of discretion going forward. It also means that regulated entities or persons get the least amount of guidance about what the law actually requires of them. And in fact, modern agencies...
God, I do not get paid enough to put up with this level of transphobia.
routinely write bad, opaque rules.
Just let me finish covering this boring, bureaucratic nightmare fascist scenario that we're talking about. Good golly.
Massive ambiguity built in. A 2019 case, Kaiser versus Wilkie, muddles the waters considerably. The existing Auer and Seminole Rock standards were seemingly modified, but the court did not explicitly overrule them. Dissenting justices, now probably in a majority, were willing to overturn Auer and Seminole Rock. This area of the law is in flux. Stay tuned. With all of that as background, there are 5 major causes for rules.
Oh man, I'm glad this guy told me to stay tuned to a obscure legal case. Definitely will be.
Being invalidated by courts. First, they may be found to be arbitrary, capricious, or an abuse of discretion. This happens, but it's not common. Second, they may be found to be contrary to constitutional right, power, privilege, or immunity. This is rare. Third, they may be found to be in excess of statutory jurisdiction or authority. This happens, but
Yo, Netanyahu.
Here is some money for cookies and or whiskey. That last chatter was so rude. BWA.
Oh, God, thank you. Some Knob Creek 9. Thank you for the $5 dono, Netanyahu. And also, socialism is not a crime. If you're really tired of dealing with YouTube chat, you can always come over to riverboat.gg. That way, you don't have to deal with ads, and you get to deal with nice people in chat, which is always great. And if anyone mean comes in, we can just IP ban them, and they can never come back. It's great.
the frequency is a function of which agency and which grant of authority. West Virginia versus EPA makes this more likely. Fourth, a rule may be found to be unsupported by substantial evidence.
Well, so here's the thing, Pastor Dean. You can say that your pronouns are whatever, but that doesn't really make me feel inclined to use said pronouns. You can say your pronouns are master, but I don't have to use them because we live in a society. You know, like this is kind of the thing, right? Like, if you're like, well, I identify as an attack helicopter with the pronouns master. Like, it's like, well, okay, but most people in society aren't going to respect that. Whereas for transgender folks, there's plenty of evidence that transgender folks are the gender that they identify as and have biology to back up that in a lot of cases. Not all cases, but most cases. And like, sorry, we don't have to validate your particular gender identity as an attack helicopter with master pronouns. Like, we live in a society, and unfortunately, the portion of society that identifies as attack helicopters is not as large or as widely accepted as transgender people, which are backed up by science and medical establishment literature. So it's going to be difficult for you to really carry that through. But, you know, maybe if you go and like submit yourself to like some kind of scientific journal, they'll do a write-up on you. You know, they'll see like how much oil you drink on a daily basis and how many missiles you strap to your arms. I don't know. I would read that medical journal like crazy. That'd be fascinating. But something tells me that you aren't sincere. Post a video of you drinking motor oil, and maybe I'll start to consider it valid.
This happens, but it's rare. Fifth, they may be found to have been promulgated in violation of some procedural requirement. This happens. And I would judge that the most common...
Do you say every time you walk? Do you put your arms out and spin when you go anywhere? I would love to know. Media Breakdown, thank you for the $2 super chat. Appreciate it.
Common is the non-compliance with cost-benefit analysis requirements, but that may just be a function of the agencies that I follow and work with rather than an accurate overall.
Well, I keep looking for a pronoun guide. I'm a simple hetero fuck, not dialed in. I need guidance. Well, I use she, her pronouns. And the other thing is you can just ask a trans person what pronouns they would like. And if you find them too difficult to use, then just use their preferred name. Like, it's not that complicated.
Assessment. There's a whole body of complex case law here, and as stated, the deference doctrines are in flux. But given time constraints, I'll leave it at that. The important thing is that in your proposing release and in the final release, you fortify your rulemaking as much.
I still can't fully figure out the substantive difference between genderqueer, gender fluid, and non-binary. They always seem like none of the above. Doesn't stop me from using the right ones. Yeah, I mean, like, honestly, as far as I can tell as a trans person, like, a lot of them are just kind of interchangeable. Like, they're, like, gender fluid is a type of non-binary identity that can switch from, like, binary identity to non-binary. You know, like, gender queer is just kind of a larger label that may apply, I think, to both trans people and even non-trans individuals. Like, you can be gender queer and still be, like, a cisgender person, is my understanding. Yeah, like, trans, like non-binary people are trans. So, like, trans is kind of the overarching umbrella. But I think genderqueer is a larger umbrella than the trans umbrella, if that makes sense, in terms of using terminology. Gender is a fuck, true. At the end of the day, anyone who gets too obsessed with this nomenclature, I think is weird and off-putting. So, like, I don't know.
As much as possible against these attacks.
Conservatives like to pretend that using pronouns is the most complicated rocket science task one can do. I mean, true. They do like to pretend that, like, pronouns are a new invention and haven't been around in the English language for, like, 2,000 years.
I have 10 recommendations for what you need to do to be an effective policymaker. A policymaker that will actually move the conservative agenda substantially forward. First, download and completely read 3 or 4 proposed rules and 3 or 4 final rules put out by the agency or agencies where you hope to work. Just reading these will give you a strong sense of what will be required.
Does he use Hellfire or Ninja Blade missile? I need to know.
Story the Bard, thank you for the 3 tier 1 subs. I really appreciate it.
Pick some that are complex and long, and pick some that are simple and shorter.
Yeah, number 1, don't do crimes. Number 2, don't say racist things on social media. And number 3 is, of course, have examples of work that people have done before you so you know how to not fuck it up.
None are probably genuinely short. Second, download and read a few proposed rules and final rules from other agencies. Different agencies do things differently, and you should not be locked into doing things the way.
Trans means transsexual? Not necessarily. Trans can also mean transgender. Transsexual and transgender are 2 different things. They can be both.
The agency bureaucracy where you hope to work has always done
Or
it.
just like a prefix that indicates, like, transgender woman, you know?
Proposed and final rules can be found on agency websites, on regulations.gov, and in the Federal Register at...
I mean, transsexual does feel outdated, but, like, I'm not going to fault someone who's, like, in their 40s, 50s, 60s that uses transsexual. Like, they're just of a different time.
federalregister.gov. Third, download and read the section of the Unified Agenda of Regulatory and Deregulatory Actions at OMB that describes the regulatory agenda of the agency.
No, trans is just a prefix that is that comes from, like, the Latin of, like, across or go beyond. So by saying something is transsexual, it's kind of like going beyond, like, your sexual binary, or by saying you're transgender, it means you're, like, going across or beyond your assigned gender at birth. Like, you know, much like transition means to cross over or transition to become something other than what you were. Like, that's, yeah. Trans is just shorthand, but, like, a lot of words use trans as a prefix.
Agency or agencies where you hope to hold office. This will serve 2 purposes.
Transportation, transfusion, yeah.
First, you will see what the agency is working on,
Translation.
much of which will need to be stopped, and you will see what you'll need to put together at the beginning of the next administration. Fourth, read the following 5 statutes: the Administrative Procedure Act, the Regulatory Flexibility Act, the Paperwork Reduction Act, the Unfunded Mandates Act, and the Congressional Review Act.
The first use of singular, they, in English dates back to the 14th century in what was effectively a werewolf fanfic called William and the Werewolf, and that proves that fandom is eternal.
True. Which makes me want to share this. Can I find this real quick? It's one of my favorite. It's one of my most favorite drawings. Oh, please, where is it? It's like a doodle of a werewolf, but it's like done really badly, and it looks like the most friendly creature you've ever seen in your life. And I'm trying to find it. It's so good. But all I'm getting is AI generated shit. God, we really need to like outlaw AI. You know, or at least like not procedural generation, but like large language model image generation shit. Like I just saw that apparently the new Magic the Gathering team up with Final Fantasy used AI generation to like make like a lot of the designs, and it's really sad to see. Really, really sad. Darn it. Okay, we can't find it. It's fine.
5th, read Executive Order 12866 as amended, and since the Biden administration is amending it unfavorably, you might want to read the previous version, and also look at OMB Circular A4. Be aware that the Biden administration is about to amend OMB Circular A4 to facilitate their regulatory agenda, and the next conservative administration will need to revise it, and you'll have to comply with the revised version. 6th, download and read.
Yeah, also, a lot of what this guy is talking about here, like this last point, read all of these, read the Administrative Procedure Act, Regulatory Flexibility Act, the Paperwork Reduction Act, Unfunded Mandates Reform Act, and the Congressional Review Act, you know, to make sure you're not breaking the law constantly.
We'll have to comply with the revised version. 6th, download and read the sections in the Office of the Federal Register's document drafting handbook relating to proposed rules and final rules. 7, read the parts of the U.S. Code that relate to the bureaucratic structure of the agency or agencies where you hope to work, and the grant of authority to that agency where you hope to work. This, of course, will be different for each agency. 8, become familiar with the statutes that govern the general regulatory structure that applies to those whom your agency regulates. In some cases, this is relatively simple. In others, it is a complex morass. If you're a lawyer,
Morass.
you presumably know how to do this. If you are, however, for example, an economist or a business person, then you need to become familiar with the law. If you don't understand the basic law governing your area, then it'll be very difficult for you to be effective. 9, read Chapter 3 in Project 2025's Mandate for Leadership, the Conservative Promise. That chapter is entitled Central Personnel Agencies Managing the Bureaucracy.
Ah, yes. Here we go. Found it. So, in the late 1500s, or maybe even early 1600s, there was a pharmacist who received hate mail after he was accused of being a werewolf, right? This was what the hate mail looked like. He was accused of being a werewolf and like being behind a bunch of like murders of children, and he got a bunch of hate mail. And this, I imagine that someone was pretty seriously upset at him. But, like, in the process of, like, I'll show him. Like, imagine drawing something this delightful and being like, Warwolf. That'll show him. This is a werewolf that is moisturized, watered, recently been fed, thriving, even.
And 10, read the relevant chapters and mandate for leadership relating to the agency or agencies where you hope to work. Although this was a coalition effort and sometimes reflects differences within the conservative movement, this book will be very helpful to you as you develop priorities and a regulatory agenda. And then read it.
Wait, is it medieval Moodang? Moodang! No, this is werewolf.
As much as you can by the Heritage Foundation and other conservative or pro-market think tanks or organizations in the substantive field where you hope to work. Become a genuine policy expert now, not on the job. You have 2 years to prepare. If you do these 10 things and watch this video again, you will be way ahead of where the typical conservative political appointee is.
I mean, like, this guy's not wrong. Like, if you bothered to watch through this out, if you're, you've signed up to do Project 2025, right? And you, like, are part of this program, you actually bother to watch this hour-long training video, and you get to this point, and he's like, yeah, if you watch it again and you take some notes and read the readings I suggested, you'll be so much more prepared. And, like, yeah, you would be so much more prepared to be, like, a fascistic bureaucrat if you did do these things that he suggested you do. And, like, thank goodness that most of the people who are signing up for this are so bad at, like, I don't know, self-reflection, doing things like this, that the vast majority of them are not even going to watch this video.
Do these things now so you're not learning on the job. To be effective, you cannot waste massive amounts of time with on-the-job training. Instead, be prepared to do the job from day one.
Exactly. Like, we want you to get in there and be fascistic on day one so we can get as many things done with as little pushback as possible.
And once again, learning the material described in this course is simply not optional if you want to be effective. I hope you found this course to be of value. I appreciate you taking the time to watch it. Thanks again.
You know, I still want to point out, even as we get to the end of this, that, like, not once in this entire video has he stopped holding his hand. And I think that that just adds fire to my initial theory that right before the filming of this video, he accidentally chopped it clean off while, like, peeling onions or something. And throughout the video, he's just holding it together with his other hand. So hopefully he got the medical attention he needs.
The time to watch it. Thanks again.
Thanks, Project 2025. Anyway, we have 2 more of those left in our playlist to be fully trained and prepared for the coming fascist end times if Donald Trump gets elected. We have 2 more. The other one, though, is an hour long, and the one after that is like 40 minutes long. We're not going to cover those today. We're just doing one. We're just doing one Project 2025 video. And folks, we've been going for 2.5 hours. If you've been enjoying the show, please hit the follow button on Twitch, hit the subscribe button on YouTube, like the goddamn YouTube stream, and please consider dropping those subs and donos because this show is still pretty small. I'm only able to come and make these shows because I feel very strongly about this and because of the support you guys show the show directly with dropping those subs, donos, etc. That is what allows me to keep going. So thanks to all of you for allowing me to do this job. I am really, truly grateful for that. My power went out. I'm sorry to hear that, Ms. Genderlin. Let's see how we doing on the likes on the YouTube stream. We're at 89 likes. I think we can hit 100. That's only 11 likes away. I believe in you guys. Call me Weird Jack, but I've been listening to your stream because I'm planting and it's a nice thing to have in the background. Well, I don't think that's weird at all. I think a lot of people listen that way. Beep, 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 beep. All right. Folks, what is your YouTube channel? Riverboat Jack. YouTube.com/riverboatjack should get you there. Haven't been here for all that, for all of those you already watched, but the few I have, oh my gosh, how have you survived them all? You know, I persevere. I'm like a cockroach, a political cockroach. I'm able to persevere in all conditions. But, and once the radiation hits, I will become strong and large. But yeah, if you are interested in watching more of those Project 2025 videos, I've compiled all of the ones we've done so far into a YouTube playlist. So consider checking that out. All joking aside about fascism, using boredom as my kryptonite, are there any federal workers who could learn more from this than us?
Jack,
Ooh.
these are the best online conversations I have. Everyone seems to be hovering in their caves. Keep it up.
Well, Michael Reich, thank you for the $57.84. That is an incredibly generous super chat. Thank you very, very much. I do my best. As long as you stay ginger. I mean, it's not going to change anytime soon. I might get a different hairstyle, but the color is probably going to stay for a bit. Aren't there any federal workers who could learn more from this than us? I mean, maybe, but like the issue, Superjet Guy, is that if you're a federal bureaucrat, there's nothing you can do about this. That's the insidious part of Project 2025. Like there's nothing in the bureaucratic system that would prevent this from happening. There's nothing they can do outside of maybe slowing it down by like a little bit, but not by much. And if Donald Trump wins, like all of the things they're talking about, there is no safeguard to prevent them from happening. Not a single one. So that's kind of where we're at. Yeah, true. You too could become a political person and do politics. I probably can't, unfortunately. Having like a backlog of like me just saying stupid shit and silly jokes probably is enough to tank any kind of political bid for office. As well as I don't know that I'd necessarily be good at it. And also I did sex work for a time, so like that's probably not going to help in the eyes of the American electorate. Oh, I can't play this. I'll get DMCA'd. Sadly, Fox of Fate. But the Donald Trump versus Kamala Harris epic rap battles of history is pretty good from everything I've heard. I think we should try to break that shit. Yeah, I just don't think I'm the I don't think that I am the vehicle for that, and I don't think that I would be able to handle that position very well. Sex work, I agree. Sex work shouldn't disqualify you from getting elected, but I'm also not particularly interested in being the person who breaks down that barrier. Kamala flees from the media and must... Wait, let's see. The media built up the hate so much, they got votes, not this time around. Kamala flees from the media and must stick to the script. She can't handle the presidency. She'd be run by the machine. Not troll, really just being a small voice of support of a great president. You guys have been gaslit, no hating. Well, I mean, like, people I know would be measurably, like, made poor by a Trump administration, would be far more likely to be arrested in a Trump administration. Like, there's really no way of slicing it where a Trump administration is good for me or anyone I know, really. Sadly. It'd be nice if we were in an election where that was, you know, either option would result in things being relatively okay, but we're not in an election like that. There's no converting you guys by others on the internet. You guys need to go look at the other side's view. I look at the other side's view all the time. I don't know. I don't know what to tell you. We watched the Trump Univision town hall. Like, we listened to Ben Shapiro. We listened to Michael Knowles, to Matt Walsh. Like, if anything, most of what I do here is listen to the other side, and it's just that the arguments that get put forward are bad. Like, I'm not like propagandizing here. Their arguments are just really bad. We just watched an internal training video for Project 2025. Like, their positions are just bad. Like, I believe in the basic concept of democracy. And I don't believe that it's particularly democratic to have a president elevated to the level of a dictator. Usually YouTube chat's the good one. I wonder what's up today. Jack, your silly jokes make this content easier to get through. I thank you for that, because otherwise I would have dissociated a long time ago. Fair.